Welcome back to the Lateral Lawyers podcast. Today we're going to talk to you, well, Liam predominantly is going to talk to you about terms and conditions, how to draft them. Every business in the land has terms and conditions of some sort, whether they are in writing or not, and obviously, for obvious reasons, it's far better to have them in writing. And Liam's going to give you a little précis run through some of the sort of types of things you'd want to cover off, and then we're going to have a bit of a back and forth about why they're in there, how to draft them, and take it from there, please, sir.
Yeah, so as I said, everyone's more or less going to have terms and conditions. They're super important, and basically the purpose of them is to really just articulate the agreement that you're trying to meet with your customers as to what you're providing and whether you're going to be paid for it and how you're going to be paid for it, and then just address any risk basically to do with providing that service or providing that product. That's really the main thing that these terms and conditions are trying to aim at. So the first thing you would really want to do in that terms and conditions is just clearly define what exactly it is that you are going to be providing the customer, whether that be a product or a service. You want a good description of that and just describe in as much detail as possible what exactly the customer is to be expecting from you and you to be expecting to provide to the customer. The next thing is the term. That would be another thing you want to address, and that is just the length basically of the agreement. So how long you both expect this agreement to go on. Is it going to be 6 months, 12 months? And then you have to think about things around that term, i.e., can it be terminated earlier? Is it going to be contingent on something else? If there's a other agreement, can that be terminated at the same time? You have to just turn your mind to all these things. Then you have to obviously look at things like consideration, which is just the legal fancy word of saying basically how you're going to be paid. So is it going to be in one lump sum up front, or is there going to be a subscription model? And how they're actually going to pay that to you? Is there going to be electronic transfer, or is it going to be, as I said, installments over time? Is there
Bitcoin?
GST in there? Bitcoin, exactly. Ethereum, or all these other sort of bizarre little coins that you're probably hearing, and I'm sure Wayne Crone's all involved in.
Wayne Crone is.
Whether that price can change over time. Again, the theme is just making sure that everything is clearly set out, because you don't obviously want to be in a position where, say, the price of your product's gone up in terms of you being able to buy it, or just the materials you need to provide that service have gone up, but then you don't have a facility in those terms and conditions to actually effectively pass that cost on to the customer. So it's just, as I said, as I keep on saying, articulating what exactly the bargain is being struck, and then turning your mind to the risk around things which can change within that element. So, for example, you might want to sort of say, if they don't pay, what's going to happen then? You want to make sure that you cover all these bases of saying, okay, this is the consideration, this is the purchase price for the goods. However, in the event you don't pay on this month or the annual subscription, either we have the right to terminate the agreement, or we can come after you in terms of we can recover costs from you for coming after you and enforcing that payment, whether that be just a fee or solicitor client basis, i.e. Your lawyer's costs are covered. And termination, as I said before, in terms of the term, you want to address things like how you'll be able to terminate this agreement, or if it can terminate at all. So that could be turning things in your mind to, is there just going to be a discrete life for the agreement, 6 months, 12 months, or is it going to be able to terminate, say, we sometimes do buying groups agreements. And part of that business model is that the people who sign up to this model have to spend a certain amount at certain suppliers. Now, if they don't start doing that, that kind of puts the whole business model out of whack. So we drafted in terms and conditions saying that if they actually don't meet minimum spends at these certain suppliers, then the agreement will be able to be terminated by the runner of the buyer group.
Just one important point there, Liam, is that what you're saying about term being a paramount consideration in terms and conditions. The courts are generally loath to interfere with the sanctity of contract, so the right of private individuals to bargain between themselves. I'm just going to adjust my laptop here; it's a bit precarious. So yeah, they're loath to interfere. So what that means is it can be difficult for a party to seek a declaration or a judgment from a court, whereby the court will infer in or mess with the agreed terms between parties. So if, for example, you're in a situation where you have a terms and conditions that has an indefinite term, there have been decisions in the higher courts where the court has actually refused to imply in, for example, an ability or a right to be able to terminate a contract upon reasonable notice when there was actually no provision around term in there. And they've also been loath to come in and say that that terms and conditions that says that is to continue in perpetuity, i.e. forever, can actually be modified, even if every other practical limb of the terms and conditions seems to point that the contractual relationship is of no utility whatsoever anymore to either of the parties. So the upshot of all that is make sure that you have a lawyer assist you, or at least check over, because it is the sort of thing, like, we're realists. We generally hate, the same way a mechanic would hate, someone trying to do most of the work on their car and then run it through for a warrant of fitness. We generally hate people trying to do their own work because it just ends up taking us more time than if we'd started from a blank canvas and understood all the intricacies and behind the scenes workings. However, we're realists, and when you're starting out, it's
money is cash is tight.
Cash is king, and things like this, even though they're critical, you can piece quite a bit of it together. That's one thing we don't really, isn't it, Liam? One thing we don't really mind too much. People having a go at it themselves and then just making sure they've got debt recovery and term and all the basics covered off. It's quite easy for us to do. But if you don't have someone like us look at it, you can really be up shit creek, for want of a more
colourful
way for want of a classier, more PC way to put it. You really can be up shit creek if you don't actually have someone make sure all those bases are covered.
And it's usually sort of transpires, it's that sort of risk element which is sort of found wanting in these terms and conditions. Most people obviously can figure out that, all right, I need to put in here things like the term, the purchase price, but then it's things like implied warranties they may have not turned their mind to when they're providing those goods or services, or like you said, the debt recovery. Sometimes they may not turn their mind to actually saying, well, if this turkey doesn't pay me, how am I actually going to chase after them? And then can I actually recover my solicitor's costs if I actually have to get them on board to chase this person? So it's just those kind of risk elements that sort of more often than not sort of found wanting when we have clients who draft their own terms and conditions themselves, because it's just those more sort of nuanced points that aren't sort of immediately obvious from just the sort of transaction.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. And I mean, the same thing as well with like including confidentiality and intellectual property clauses. Sometimes whatever you might be providing might involve you divulging sort of IP and stuff, and just it may not seem immediately obvious to include that in there, but all of a sudden, if you're actually giving away or allowing someone to use IP, you're really wanting to make sure that that's locked up tight, basically saying, look, you're only allowed to use this IP for the length of the agreement, and if it terminates, you have to either remove, like, destroy all the documents we provided you or return them, or just stuff like that. Yeah. You good?
I'm great.
Oh, sorry, thought you were frozen. Yeah, so I think those are definitely kind of the big points that you have to sort of, as I said, turn your mind to when you're thinking about drafting your own terms and conditions. It's just, as I said, always about making sure you articulate the agreement and define the risk and try to address it where you can.
Yeah. So is that all we got today?
Yeah, I mean, you can labor the point, I guess, but
Yeah, I
I
just want to
think it's just
rack my brain for a couple. Yeah, so you've covered off. We've covered off the term. We've covered off
mm,
consideration. We've covered
mm,
off debt recovery. You
mm.
need to think about
I mean, there's things like private policy. You know, if you're collecting information from
privacy policy.
clients,
Yep, yep,
you'll have to make sure that you'll address that, i.e., that you'll keep information secure, and you have to articulate how you use the information and how long you'll store it for,
yep,
how the means you're going to do to protect it. Um, so
yep.
those are all
Protect.
more just things.
We talked about protection of IP.
Yeah.
Sometimes
Returns and exchanges.
returns and exchanges set out. Sometimes protection of IP will be actually set out in a way that it sets out broadly what the IP is, so there can be no mistake about what actually constitutes IP and what therefore is protected.
And that can just easily be done by saying, for the purposes of these terms and conditions, the intellectual property capitalized I and P means XYZ, you know, all documents to do with the business or the service we provided you, and just include definitions. Using definitions in these terms and conditions is a great thing to do. It just makes it super crystal clear, and a definition that you can both point to in the event of maybe a bit of a dispute, just saying, look, no, this is actually what we agreed this word was meant to mean.
Yeah. I'm just trying to think of some of the ones we've done in the last sort of 12 months. Yeah.
Things like insurance, it's another sort of big risk liability. I know we did one where someone someone puts bins in like cafes and stuff as part of like a enviro-friendly composting kind of initiative. And now obviously you want to think about things like insurance, because you want to be saying, all right, who's going to actually look after those bins? You know, whose responsibility is it to look after those bins? What happens if they get damaged? You know, things like that.
Yeah. I'm just trying to think of the one I did last year as well with the New Zealand-based organic sort of daily site. Now, just some of the things in there were just making sure that it was clear, for example, that that nothing that came through that it was just a marketplace, and that nothing that passed through the marketplace that the owner or the proprietor of the marketplace didn't give any warranty or any kind of guarantee as to the quality or otherwise of the products, because they had no proprietary interest in the actual products. It was solely
just a conduit, really. Yeah.
Yes, and then so that's an example of how particularized your T's and C's need to be. In that case, we need to make it very clear that there was a complete exclusion for any kind of, but for say willful or malicious type of a behaviour, there was actually an exclusion for any kind of liability. I don't even think we carved that out. We just it was obviously for the customer to push back, which they wouldn't, given the quantum of product of the dollar amounts of products being bought and sold in that particular business. But just careful to make out it is a marketplace only, and that there was no responsibility, because the average consumer would actually pick up something from somewhere and think that was, in a way, in their head, was just homogenized to the seller, and they've got it from these people. So just things like that as well, you need to be very careful of.
I mean, I guess it's pretty grand plans, but I guess if you're thinking of creating things which could eventually become maybe like a franchise model, or even if you're thinking of ending up in a business model which requires kind of one company as being the vehicle, but then another company owning the IP, you'll want something in there in terms of conditions to do with assignment, because eventually you might want to assign those contracts to a different entity, say to the master franchisee or something like that. And you'll definitely want to be able to have those clauses in there. And it's just, again, just a allow that flexibility of being able to structure the business model the way you want.
Yep, and if you'd want something in there as well, of course, setting out that if the customer is a corporate or a trust or any other kind of body corporate, that the people behind it give personal guarantees to the extent that they'll step in as guarantor and have all the same liability as the principal customer under the terms and conditions. That's really important as well. You know, when we're dealing with situations where companies have solvency issues, particularly at the moment, and we're not on the sharp end of that, but we'll do some sort of pre-ambulance at the bottom of the cliff type of work. And one of the important things to remember is that pretty much all the big trade companies will have personal guarantees in their terms and conditions, which means that that whole corporate veil offered by a limited liability company in that instance is reduced somewhat by the fact that any sensible trade creditor is going to have terms and conditions with teeth that can get to the people behind the company if there's significant amount of credit involved.
So
that's an important consideration as well.
100%.
Cool. I think that's enough information for today. Mr. Cowley.
Always a pleasure.
Wrap this one up.
I decided to change my background this time. I realized that having a glaring kind of white window behind me is probably not the most sort of aesthetic
I quite
background.
like that. I quite like it.
I was trying to go for maybe a Halo-esque kind of visual, but now I've gone for more floral.
Because I was ashamed of I don't even want to show it. I in a bit of a flurry, I decided I was just going to have a salmon bagel with capers, a really nice salmon bagel with capers this morning. But then that was at about 6 when I first got up, and I decided I also needed some of those fabulous scrambled eggs you taught me how to make, Liam. And but I haven't yet. I didn't really have time to get rid of the
evidence
I created afterwards. So I've tried to just.
I like that you're still upskilling, whether it be culinary or legal.
Always upskilling.
Always upskilling.
All right,
awesome.
mate. I'll talk to you soon.
Another one for the books. See ya.
Thanks, everybody. Cheers.
Bye.